Imagine discovering that your own daughter has been plotting against you for months, selling you out to a conman who's after your inheritance. The worst part, she's been coaching him on how to manipulate you, all while pretending to be your supportive daughter. What would you do if you found out that the man you trusted and the daughter you raised were both part of a cold, calculated plan to steal everything you've worked for? But this widow isn't just giving up. She's about to turn the tables in a way no one ever saw coming. Witness how this betrayed mother uses her intelligence and calculated moves to not only reclaim her life, but also expose the people who thought they could destroy her. It's a story of unexpected revenge, justice, and survival. Hit that like button, share this gripping tale with your friends, and comment below with what you would do if you were in her shoes. Don't forget to subscribe for more twists, turns, and incredible stories like this one. My daughter couldn't scrape together enough money to fix her broken laptop. Without telling her, I quietly took it to a repair shop as a birthday surprise. When I returned to collect it, the technician's face had gone pale. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely steady, "you need to change your locks and contact the police." Then he turned the screen toward me, and my entire world cracked open. My own child had been plotting to ruin me. Let me walk you through how I ended up staring at messages that shattered everything I believed about my family. It all began 3 months earlier when a life insurance check arrived from my late Uncle Vernon, $1 million. Not the kind of money that makes headlines, but for a widow who'd been carefully stretching every dollar since losing her husband 8 years ago. It was life-changing. My daughter Ashley, 25 years old and still living with me in our modest Mansfield, Ohio home, nearly burst with excitement when I showed her the check. "Mom, we're set. We can finally move to Los Angeles, get that car you've always dreamed about, actually live." She was literally bouncing around our little kitchen. But 5 decades of life had taught me something about sudden windfalls. "Sweetheart, $1 million doesn't stretch as far as it used to. The smarter move is to invest it, let it grow quietly, so we never face the hardships we went through after your father passed." Ashley's enthusiasm evaporated instantly. She nodded and said she understood, but something behind her eyes looked like a calculator clicking into gear, like she was already working on a different solution entirely. She'd always had extravagant tastes on a modest income. I just never imagined how far she'd go to bridge that gap. Around the same time, I began stopping at Murphy's coffee shop on Elm Street during my lunch breaks from the elementary school where I worked as a nurse. That's where David Harrison entered my life. Tall, dark, haired with dignified streaks of gray at his temples, wearing work boots and a flannel shirt that managed to look polished without trying too hard. "Haven't seen you here before," he said one Tuesday, sliding uninvited into the booth across from me with an easy confidence. Under normal circumstances, I'd have sent him packing, but something about his smile made me pause. "I could say the same about you," I replied, setting down my book. "David Harrison," he said, offering his hand. "A local contractor. And you are Claire Morrison, local school nurse who enjoys her lunch breaks in peace." He laughed, not the hollow, performative laugh men use when they're trying to charm you, but something genuine and warm. "Fair point. But before I let you have your piece, what kind of books do you read?" I held up my paperback romance novel, bracing for some condescending remark about escapist fiction. Instead, he nodded with what looked like genuine appreciation. "My grandmother devoured those. She said they reminded her that love could still find you, even after you thought you'd seen everything life had to offer." Just like that, David Harrison had said exactly the right thing. Over the following weeks, our coffee shop encounters became routine. He told me about his contracting business, his move from Pennsylvania to Ohio for a fresh start following his divorce. I told him about Ashley, about my job, about how hollow the house had felt since my husband's passing. What I kept to myself was the inheritance. I'd learned early that money warps how people perceive you, and I wanted to know whether David was drawn to Claire the school nurse, not Claire the widow with a windfall. 3 months into what I'd begun to think might actually be something real, Ashley's laptop started giving her trouble. The screen would flicker, programs would lock up, and she'd bang on it out of frustration. With her 25th birthday approaching, I decided getting it repaired would make a thoughtful surprise. "I'll handle it," I told her the morning she left for her waitressing shift at Denny's. "Think of it as an early birthday gift." I drove to TechMend on Market Street, the same place that had rescued my own laptop 2 years earlier after a coffee incident. Jimmy, the young owner, couldn't have been more than 23, but he understood computers the way my generation understood rotary phones. "Should be ready tomorrow," he said, accepting Ashley's laptop. "Probably just needs a good cleanup and maybe some software updates." The next afternoon, I went back to retrieve it. Jimmy was standing behind the counter, looking as though he'd witnessed something disturbing. The moment he spotted me walking in, he moved quickly to guide me into a private corner. "Mrs. Morrison," he said in a hushed tone, "I need to show you something. You're not going to like it." My pulse quickened. "What's wrong? Is the computer damaged?" "No, ma'am, the computer's fine. It's what I found on it." He led me to a workstation in the back and opened Ashley's laptop. I was doing a routine cleanup when I came across these emails. I nearly deleted them, thinking they were junk, and then I realized what I was looking at. The screen displayed Ashley's email inbox, and there it was in cold, clinical black and white. Messages exchanged between my daughter and someone listed as D. Harrison, with subject lines like payment schedule and target information. I gripped the edge of the desk as Jimmy scrolled through them. The thread stretched back 2 months, right around the time I'd first spoken to David at that coffee shop. "Payment upon completion, $50,000. Read one message from Ashley. She trusts too easily. Lonely widow, alone for 8 years. Inheritance worth approximately $1 million. Has expressed interest in relocating somewhere warmer." David's response: "Coffee shop contact established. Target is receptive to attention. Proceeding with courtship phase." Need more on her interests. Daily schedule. Emotional vulnerabilities. Ashley had replied with a profile of my life, so precise it read like a federal dossier. She knew I was up at 5:30 every morning, that I missed my husband most acutely on Sunday evenings, when we used to settle in together for old movies, that I felt self-conscious about my gray hair, but was too practical to spend money coloring it. The final message buckled my knees. Once she's emotionally invested, steer her toward a fake investment vehicle. Standard elderly financial exploitation. Family involvement will never be suspected. Jimmy's voice reached me as if from a great distance. "Mrs. Morrison, you need to sit down. Should I call someone?" That's when I realized I was hyperventilating. My own daughter had paid this man to seduce me and drain my bank account. Every tender conversation, every carefully chosen word, every moment I thought we were building something genuine, it had all been scripted by Ashley in exchange for $50,000. But as I sat in that repair shop, staring at the most complete betrayal I could conceive of, something unexpected happened. I didn't fall apart. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a cold, crystalline fury. Not the hot, impulsive anger that leads to mistakes, but the quiet, calculating kind that makes a person genuinely dangerous. "Jimmy," I said, my voice steadier than it had any right to be, "I need you to print every one of these emails." "Yes, ma'am. Should I call the police?" I looked at the screen one final time, memorizing David's manufactured tenderness and Ashley's casual cruelty. "Not yet. First, I'm going to give them exactly what they're asking for. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car outside Tech, Mend with 40, 3 pages of printed emails, feeling as though the floor had dissolved beneath my entire life. Because in a very real sense it had. Ashley, the daughter I'd raised alone after her father died when she was 17. The girl I'd worked back shifts to help through community college. The child who had sobbed in my arms over broken hearts, who'd called me her best friend just the previous week. That girl had sold me out for $50,000. I drove home in a daze, the manila envelope of evidence sitting on the passenger seat like a ticking device. Our little house on Maple Street looked identical to how I'd left it, same peeling paint on the shutters, same window boxes I'd planted last spring, same front porch where Ashley and I had sat just yesterday debating what to make for dinner, but nothing was the same, nothing ever would be. Ashley wouldn't be home for 3 more hours. David had responded within hours with what amounted to a professional resume for emotional devastation. 3 previous projects, all successful, all aimed at women over 50 who'd recently come into money. His signature approach was the slow burn, establishing what felt like genuine emotional intimacy before pivoting to financial manipulation. But the detail that made my hands tremble was Ashley's description of me. Asterisk mother, extremely isolated since father's death. Craves connection but is suspicious of opportunists. Recommend contractor present as working, class, avoid any appearance of wealth. She responds to protectiveness and genuine curiosity about her inner life. Asterisk every conversation David and I had shared, every carefully timed compliment, every moment I believed he was seeing real me. Ashley had written the script. The kitchen timer went off reminding me to take my blood pressure medication. The irony of that, given what this discovery was doing to my cardiovascular system, was not lost on me. But as I swallowed the pill with a sip of coffee, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't broken. I was furious. For 8 years, I'd been Claire the grieving widow, Claire the struggling single mother, Claire who needed help, who needed looking after. Well, that chapter was ending. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in months. Marcus Webb, my late husband's former business partner, now a practicing attorney. He'd handled my husband's estate and had always checked in around the holidays, a warm constant through the years of solitude. Claire, good to hear your voice. How are you holding up? Marcus, I need legal counsel. How quickly can we meet somewhere private? His tone shifted immediately. What's wrong? Are you in some kind of trouble? Not me, but someone is about to be. An hour later, I was seated across from Marcus in a corner booth at Romano's, a restaurant 40 minutes from town, safely beyond any chance of Ashley spotting us. He listened without once interrupting, occasionally jotting careful notes in his precise lawyer's handwriting. When I finished, he sat back and studied me with something approaching admiration. Claire, you understand this constitutes conspiracy to commit elder fraud. These emails document a federal crime. I know, but I want to handle this my way first. Your way meaning what exactly? I leaned forward. They think I'm a helpless woman who will hand over her life savings to the first man who pays her attention. I want to demonstrate exactly how mistaken that assumption is. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a revenge plan. Not revenge, justice. There's a meaningful difference. He studied my face for a long moment. What do you need from me? 3 things. First, quietly open a separate account and transfer the bulk of the inheritance somewhere Ashley has no knowledge of and no access to. Second, document everything from this conversation in case we end up in court. And third, I allowed myself the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. Help me give David and Ashley precisely what they've been asking for. Marcus closed his notepad slowly. Whatever you're planning, be careful. These people have already demonstrated they'll betray family for profit. There's no predicting how far they'll go if they feel the walls closing in. Marcus, they made one critical error, which was, they assumed I'd be easy to break because I've been grieving and struggling. But they forgot I survived 8 years as a single mother, completed nursing school at 42, and held this family together while my husband was dying of cancer. I'm not fragile. I'm just finished being underestimated. Driving home, I thought about David and Ashley, probably exchanging messages right now, plotting their next move in what they believed was an airtight scheme. They had no idea their target had just become their greatest liability. Tonight, when Ashley came home from work, I'd play the same trusting mother she'd been manipulating for months. Tomorrow, I'd continue my coffee dates with David, inhabiting the role of the lonely widow, slowly falling for his practiced charm. But while they believed they were running the play, I'd be quietly engineering the most satisfying downfall they never saw coming. After all, they'd taught me something valuable through those emails. Sometimes the most effective revenge isn't getting even. It's being smarter than the people who assumed you weren't. And I was about to show them exactly what a supposedly helpless 52-year old-school nurse was capable of. Ashley burst through the front door at 6:45, still dressed in her Denny's uniform, bringing the familiar smell of coffee and maple syrup with her. "Mom, how was your day?" she called out, dropping her bag on the kitchen counter in that automatic way she'd done every evening for 3 months. Except now I understood she wasn't just coming home. She was checking for cracks in the facade, looking for any sign that her carefully constructed plan was showing stress fractures. "Lovely, actually. Oh, I picked up your laptop. It's on your dresser, casual, relaxed." Like we were discussing the forecast instead of the fact that I'd just discovered her blueprint to destroy me. Ashley's face lit up with what I used to interpret as genuine gratitude. Now I could see it for what it was, relief that her communication channel with David had been restored. "You're amazing, Mom. I have so much work to catch up on. Work. Interesting word choice." According to the emails, Ashley had quietly dropped out of community college 8 months earlier and had been maintaining the fiction of enrollment ever since. Another detail I'd missed while trying to be a supportive parent. "How was your shift?" I asked, placing dinner on the table. "Exhausting. Tips were decent, though." She settled in and launched into stories about difficult customers and kitchen tensions, the same comfortable routine we'd fallen into. But now I could see through the performance. The money complaints, strategically placed to reinforce why she'd eventually need financial support. The work stories calculated to sustain my sympathy. Even her habit of asking about my day, which I'd always appreciated as attentiveness, had been intelligence gathering, feeding information to David. My phone buzzed, a text from David, precisely on schedule. *Wonderful afternoon. Would you consider dinner Friday? I know a quiet spot in Ashland. I showed it to Ashley, watching her expression with careful attention. What do you think? Is it too fast to have dinner with him? Ashley's eyes flicked in a way I now recognized as calculation running just beneath the surface. Mom, you deserve to be happy. David seems genuinely kind. You've been alone for such a long time. I think you should go. Kind. The man she'd contracted to steal my inheritance was kind. You don't think I'm being reckless, dating at my age. Mom, you're only 52. Plenty of people discover love in the second half of their lives. She paused, calculating how much enthusiasm to offer. Besides, you've seemed different since you started spending time with him. Lighter. That much was true. I felt lighter, because I genuinely believed someone might value me for who I was, rather than what I had. The irony would have been almost funny if it weren't so devastating. After dinner, Ashley disappeared to her room with her laptop, presumably reporting back to David about my reaction to his dinner invitation. I cleaned the kitchen deliberately, thinking about all the conversations we'd had in this very room. Conversations I believed were genuine, while she'd been cataloging information for a artist. Around 9, I knocked on her door. "Ashley, can we talk for a minute?" "Of course, Mom. Come in." She was on her bed with the laptop open. When I entered, she quickly minimized whatever she'd been working on. "I've been thinking about the inheritance," I said, settling on the edge of her bed. "About what you said about actually living instead of just surviving." Her attention sharpened like a heat-seeking radar. "Really? Maybe you had a point about being too conservative. I've spent 8 years just getting through each day. Here I have an actual opportunity to do something different." I watched her face carefully. David mentioned he sometimes invests in real estate, house flipping, that kind of thing. He said there's real money in it for people who understand the market. A loving daughter, hearing her recently widowed mother consider a major financial investment with a man she'd known for 3 months, would express caution. Concern, hesitation. Ashley lit up like a storefront at Christmas. "That sounds genuinely exciting, Mom. David seems sharp about business. Have you talked to him about the specifics?" "Not yet. I thought I'd see how Friday goes and perhaps raise it then. But Ashley, if I actually did something like this, it would be a significant risk. What if everything went sideways?" Ashley reached over and took my hand. "Mom, you can't spend the rest of your life afraid. Sometimes trusting people is the only way forward. And I have a really strong feeling about David." Of course she did. She stood to collect $50,000 if he succeeded. "You genuinely think I should trust him?" "I think you should trust yourself. You read people well, Mom. If David feels right to you, he probably is." Sitting across from my daughter, listening to her encourage me to trust the man she'd hired to rob me, felt like living inside a funhouse mirror. But it was also precisely the confirmation I needed. This was no misunderstanding or moment of weakness. Ashley was actively, eagerly participating in my undoing. "Thank you, sweetheart. It really does mean everything to have your support. I just want you to be happy, Mom." As I kissed her good night and walked to my own room, I wondered whether Ashley had ever genuinely loved me, or whether I had simply always been a resource to be managed, an asset to be liquidated when the moment was right. That was a question for another time. Tonight, I had a dinner to prepare for, and David Harrison was about to discover that the widow he'd been so carefully cultivating had a few surprises of her own. Friday evening, I stood before my bedroom mirror applying lipstick and wondering if this was how undercover operatives felt before stepping into the field. I'd chosen a blue dress Ashley had always said brought out my eyes, paired with the pearl earrings my husband gave me for our anniversary. I wanted to look like a woman on the edge of making questionable decisions in the name of romance. David arrived exactly on time, wearing a blazer over dark jeans, carrying a single white rose. If I hadn't known what he was, I might have found the gesture genuinely sweet. "You look beautiful, Claire," he said, offering his arm as we walked to his truck. "Thank you. You clean up rather nicely yourself." The restaurant in Ashland was precisely what I'd anticipated: dim lighting, private corners, the kind of atmosphere where a woman might feel special enough to override her better judgment. David had clearly done this before. Over appetizers, he asked thoughtfully about my week, listening with the kind of focused, unhurried attention that had originally drawn me to him. He remembered small details from earlier conversations, asked meaningful follow-up questions, made me feel as if my thoughts genuinely mattered to someone. It was masterfully executed. Without the emails, I'd have been completely disarmed. "Ashley mentioned you might be ready for some changes," he said as our entrees arrived. I nearly choked on my wine. Of course, she'd coached him on how to introduce the subject. Did she? What kind of changes? She said you might be open to taking some risks, trying new things. I find that admirable, Claire. A lot of people get locked into routines as they age. Well, I have been thinking about what to do with my uncle's inheritance. Maybe Ashley was right that I've been holding back. David's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly, though his expression remained placid. Inheritance funds can be either a blessing or an anchor, depending entirely on how they're managed. How do you mean? Most people either park the money in low-yield savings and let inflation consume it, or they spend it on things that hold no lasting value. The intelligent move is to put it to work. Asterisk, and here we go, asterisk, I thought. The sales pitch begins. I've done reasonably well with real estate over the years. David continued. Nothing complicated. Identify distressed properties, renovate them, sell them at a profit. Consistent returns if you know the landscape. That sounds like it requires a great deal of expertise. The real barrier isn't expertise, it's capital. Most people simply don't have the liquid funds to move decisively when exceptional opportunities appear. I lifted my wine and adopted what I hoped looked like thoughtful consideration. How much capital are we talking about? Depends on the scope of the project. The opportunities I'm currently looking at would require a partner with roughly, perhaps $800,000 in accessible funds. $800,000. That left me just enough to feel financially stable while they vanished with the bulk of it. They'd even calculated precisely how much to leave behind so I wouldn't immediately panic. That's a considerable sum, David. It is. But Claire, he paused, as though weighing how much to reveal. Can I be honest with you about something personal? I nodded, bracing for whatever manipulative maneuver came next. I've been thinking about you quite a lot lately. About what we might be to each other. I know it's only been a few months, but there's something real happening here, isn't there? Without the emails, I might have melted in my chair. David was looking at me with such apparent sincerity, such genuine warmth, that it was easy to understand how other women had believed him. Completely, I think so, I said softly. The thing is, I've been burned before. My ex-wife wanted the fruits of someone else's labor without contributing anything of her own. So when I meet a woman like you, someone with intelligence, substance, resources she's built herself, it feels like we could be actual partners. Partners. There was the hook, not just romance. A partnership. A woman my age, after 8 years of solitude, would be hungry for someone to share decisions with, to feel like part of a team again. Partners in what sense? In every sense, life, and perhaps business, if the right opportunity presented itself. He let the sentence hang open, inviting me to complete it myself. Brilliant. He wasn't requesting anything. He was simply planting the notion that combining resources was something two people building a future together might naturally do. These property deals you mentioned, would there be room for a partner in that? David smiled as though I'd just suggested exactly what he'd been hoping to hear. Actually, yes. I've been examining a development project outside Columbus, acquiring distressed homes, renovating them, selling them to young families. It demands more capital than I can access alone, but the profit potential is significant. How significant? Conservative projection. A return of 30 to 40% within 18 months. I work to look impressed rather than repulsed by his audacity. That almost sounds too good to be real. I know it does. That's precisely why most people miss opportunities like this. They assume that anything with that kind of return must be fraudulent. The irony was so layered, I could have sliced it with my dinner knife. There's actually a deadline, he continued. The seller needs a commitment by next Friday, or he moves on to other buyers. Of course, there was a deadline. There always was in schemes like this, manufactured urgency to prevent the target from thinking clearly or seeking outside counsel. Next Friday. That's very soon. David reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Claire, I completely understand if you need more time. This is a significant decision, and I have no desire to pressure you, but I also don't want you to look back and regret missing something that could transform your life. Asterisk our life, asterisk he probably meant to add, let me sit with it over the weekend. I said, perhaps we could drive out and look at the properties Monday. Perfect. I think you're going to see the potential immediately. As David drove me home, chattering confidently about renovation timelines and market projections, I imagined Ashley sitting in her room right now texting him updates about my mood, perhaps feeding him real-time guidance on what to say next. When we reached my driveway, David walked me to the door with the practiced courtesy of a perfect gentleman. Tonight was truly wonderful, Claire, for me as well. He leaned in for a good night kiss, and for one disorienting second, I nearly stepped back, but I was still playing the role of unsuspecting widow, so I let it happen. It was a good kiss. I had to concede that much. David was extraordinarily skilled at his work. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. Maybe we can start running some preliminary numbers on the investment. I'd like that very much. Watching his truck disappear down the street, I thought about all the other women who might have stood in their doorways at precisely this moment, feeling as though they'd just encountered their future with no idea they'd actually just met their destruction. But David and Ashley had made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that being lonely and trusting made me a soft target. Come Monday, when we drove out to look at those properties, they were going to discover precisely how catastrophically wrong they were. Saturday morning, I woke to the smell of bacon and fresh coffee. Ashley was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she cooked, looking more buoyant than she had in months. I watched her from the doorway for a moment. My daughter, who believed her payday was 1 week away. Morning, Mom. How did the date go? Wonderfully, I said, accepting the plate she handed me. David is really something exceptional. I can see it all over your face. She settled in across from me with her own breakfast. You're practically glowing. If only she knew what I was actually glowing about. Ashley, can I be honest with you? I set down my fork. Sometimes I worry I'm just lonely and letting that cloud my judgment. Am I being foolish about this? She looked at me steadily. Mom, you're one of the sharpest people I know. You raised me on your own, put yourself through nursing school at 42, held us together while Dad was dying. Why would you suddenly stop being capable of sound judgment just because a man is involved? Asterisk because my own daughter trained him to exploit my blind spots. Asterisk I thought, but let the silence speak for itself. I just don't want to become one of those women who hands her life savings to a smooth-talking stranger. David doesn't come across like that at all. He has his own business, his own income. What would he possibly want from you besides company? The question drifted between us like smoke. Ashley posed it with such seamless innocence that for a flickering moment I questioned everything, wondered if there was some interpretation of those emails I'd somehow misread. Then I remembered the specifics, the way David had known precisely which subjects would animate me, how he'd referenced details about my daily routines that I'd never mentioned to him, the calculated way he'd introduced the investment opportunity, engineering the impression that the idea had originated with me. You're probably right, I said. I'm overthinking things. You deserve someone who treats you the way you should have been treated all along, Mom. After breakfast, Ashley left for what she called the library, which I now understood to mean a meeting with David to align their next moves. That gave me exactly the opening I needed. I drove to Marcus's office. He's running the classic romance con. Marcus said, after I'd walked him through Friday's dinner, build emotional connection, introduce investment opportunity, manufacture urgency. The timeline is moving faster than I expected. Commitment by next Friday. That's what he said. Are you certain you want to continue with this approach? We have more than enough documentation right now to involve law enforcement. I've been weighing that all morning. Marcus, if we bring in the police today, what actually happens? Best scenario, David faces arrest for attempted fraud. Ashley is charged as a co-conspirator. Possibly. The evidence is compelling, but no money has actually changed hands. A skilled defense attorney could argue the emails were taken out of context, that no actual crime was committed. David appears to be a professional. His representation would likely claim a genuine relationship and a legitimate investment opportunity. I sat with that for a moment. So they might emerge from this with nothing more than legal bills and mild embarrassment. It's possible the justice system doesn't always produce justice, Claire. Then we proceed. But I want to refine the setup. For the next hour, Marcus and I worked through the details of what we'd taken to calling Operation Turnabout. By the time I walked out of his office, I felt less like a victim preparing to be defrauded and more like a general preparing for the decisive engagement. Monday arrived gray and drizzly, ideal weather, I thought, for touring distressed properties. David appeared at 10 sharp, dressed in work clothes and carrying a clipboard, projecting every appearance of conducting legitimate business, ready to see your future. He asked, kissing my cheek as I climbed into his truck. I'm a little nervous, I admitted, which happened to be true, though not for the reasons he assumed. That's entirely natural. It means you're taking this seriously. The first property was a two-story house in a neighborhood that had seen considerably better days. David walked me through it with the assured competence of an actual contractor, pointing out structural issues, discussing renovation costs, outlining projected timelines. It was impressive, honestly. If he weren't a predator, he might have made a genuinely skilled professional. The seller is asking $200,000. He said as we stood in what remained of the living room. Add another 100 to 150 for renovations, and we could sell comparable finishes in this area for 450 to 500. So roughly 200,000 in profit on this one alone. And this is just one of 6 properties in the package. The numbers kept climbing, which told me the hook was being set ever deeper. We spent 3 hours walking through houses, working through spreadsheets, discussing timelines and projections. David clearly knew the business. The problem was visible only in the details he couldn't convincingly fake. He was vague about permits and inspections, deflected questions about title documentation into discussions of profit potential, and discouraged the idea of an independent appraisal by pointing to the seller's deadline. Textbook con methodology. Keep the target moving past practical details. Keep the focus on the emotional appeal of transformation. By the time we finished the tour, David was radiating quiet confidence that he had me completely in hand. Over lunch at a diner outside town, he produced a folder of documents engineered to look impressively official. I've put together a preliminary partnership agreement, he said, sliding papers across the table. Nothing binding yet, just a framework for how we'd structure the investment and divide the returns. I read through it carefully, noting how the language had been crafted to sound legally significant while committing David to absolutely nothing, while granting him unfettered access to my money. This looks rather complicated. It always does at first. It's really just protecting both of us. Your investment is secured by the properties themselves. Loss exist, and the moneycoism can make you schismished into untraceable accounts. David, can I ask you something? Anything? Why me? You could presumably find investors with considerably deeper pockets. For just a fraction of a second, his mask shifted. I watched him recalibrate, presumably reaching for whatever Ashley had told him about my insecurities. Claire, this isn't purely about capital. Yes, what you have access to makes the project financially viable, but I want to build something with you. Not just a business structure, but a life. I've been on my own for 3 years since my divorce, and I'd stopped believing I'd find someone I could trust with both my heart and my future. It was a beautiful performance, probably refined through 3 previous deployments. I want to do this, I said, holding his gaze. I want to be your partner. David's smile was radiant with triumph. Really? Really, when do we move forward? I'll contact the seller tonight. He'll need the funds available by Friday for the closing. 800,000. That's correct. I know it's substantial, Claire. But this time next year, you're going to be profoundly glad you took this leap. Asterisk our asterisk leap, he perhaps meant to say. As we drove back to my house, David animatedly sketching our shared future, I thought about Ashley, probably incandescent with excitement right now, tallying her $50,000 payday. Both of them thought they'd won. What they didn't know was that while they'd been teaching me about deception and betrayal, I'd been doing some learning of my own, and their education was about to commence in the most unpleasant terms imaginable. Tuesday morning, I called the bank and asked to speak with Janet Morrison, my investment advisor since the inheritance arrived. Janet was sharp, around 35, and had never once treated me like a confused elderly woman who needed her financial decisions made by someone more qualified. Mrs. Morrison, she said when I arrived, I have to be direct with you. This is a highly irregular request. I understand that. You want to withdraw $800,000 in cashier's checks, and you won't disclose the nature of the investment. She studied my face. In the 8 months we've worked together, you've been remarkably conservative, almost cautiously so. This is a dramatic departure. Janet, have I given you any reason to doubt my judgment in that time? No, you haven't. Then trust that I know what I'm doing here. She regarded me for a long moment. Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask directly, is anyone applying pressure to you to make this investment? Elder financial exploitation is far more prevalent than most people realize. If only she knew how precisely right she was. No one is pressuring me. This is entirely my decision, and I've given it careful thought. After 10 more minutes of measured resistance, Janet agreed to prepare the checks, though she documented her formal objection in my file. Wednesday afternoon, Ashley arrived home from her fictional library session, vibrating with barely contained energy. How's studying going? I asked, serving dinner, really productive. She couldn't quite conceal her excitement. Mom, I've been doing more thinking about David's investment. I really do think you should move forward with it. The numbers look solid. Research? Right, more likely she'd been toasting the approaching payday. As it happens, I've decided to do it. Ashley's face transformed completely. That's incredible, Mom. That is genuinely incredible. The closing is Friday afternoon. I am so proud of you for taking this chance. Thursday evening, David took me to an even more impressive restaurant. A man feeling supremely confident about the following day's transaction. Are you nervous? He asked, covering my hand with his. A little. It's a great deal of money. Of course it is. But Claire, 1 year from today, you're going to look back on this moment as the turning point. What happens after the closing? I asked. What does our arrangement actually look like? I handle the operational side, contractors, renovations, the business mechanics. You'll be a silent partner, receiving your proportional share of the returns. Asterisk silent partner. Asterisk hand over the money and disappear from any meaningful involvement. Clean and untraceable. And us, I asked, our relationship, where does that go after Friday? David's expression became warm with apparent sincerity. Claire, tomorrow isn't only about business. It's about committing to building a real future. Once we're partners in this project, I want to start planning the rest of our lives together. I've been thinking maybe it's time to talk about combining our lives more completely. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He was planning to take my money and then install himself in my home to have ongoing access to whatever remained. That sounds like something I'd very much like, I said, playing my final scenes of this particular role. Friday morning broke clear and brilliant, as though the universe had a sense of irony. Ashley made pancakes and talked enthusiastically about what a significant step I was taking. When she asked what time I'd have confirmation, I told her David expected the paperwork to finalize by evening. "And then you'll officially be partners," she said, hugging me before she left. "I love you, Mom. I'm so happy for you." I held her, wondering if it would be the last time she reached for me willingly. David arrived at 2:00 sharp, dressed with uncharacteristic formality for a man who typically favored work clothes. He looked like someone who had just committed what he believed was the perfect crime. "Ready to change everything?" he asked, kissing my cheek. I have never been more ready. The title company was 40 minutes away in an unfamiliar part of the city. As we drove, David talked about renovation schedules and yield projections with the easy confidence of a man who believed the hardest work was already done. The building projected professional credibility from the outside. But inside, the details told a different story. Generic rental furniture, a visibly nervous woman behind the reception desk, documents arranged on the conference table with the careful staging of theatrical props. I played my role with precision, asking exactly the questions a trusting investor would ask while carefully avoiding anything that would expose the fraud. "Everything appears to be in order," the fake title agent said after an hour of reviewing meaningless paperwork. "We just need the investment funds." I opened my bag and set the cashier's checks on the table. David's eyes locked onto them with an intensity that had nothing to do with affection. $800,000, I said, "our future. Mrs. Morrison, I just need your signature here confirming that these funds are being transferred voluntarily." I picked up the pen, paused briefly as though gathering courage, then signed my name with a deliberate flourish. David was luminous with triumph. "Claire, you are not going to regret this. I'm quite certain I won't." The woman gathered the checks and the signed documents. "We'll process everything this afternoon. You should receive transfer confirmation by 6 o'clock. Walking back to David's truck, he was more animated than I'd ever seen him, talking about what we'd build together, where this would lead, how everything was about to change. Asterisk yes, asterisk I thought, asterisk it really is. Asterisk when he dropped me off, I invited him to a celebration dinner at 7 and suggested he ask Ashley to join us. He agreed warmly. As I watched him drive away, a calm settled over me that felt nothing like the quiet I'd lived in for 8 years of grief. This was the stillness of someone who had already won. At 6:47 p.m., my phone rang, David's name on the screen. "Claire, the transfer went through perfectly. We're officially partners. That is wonderful news," I said, stirring sauce on the stove. "I can't wait to celebrate. I'm bringing champagne. We have a great deal to toast tonight." "We certainly do." Ashley arrived at 6:55, still in her uniform, but moving with the contained energy of someone anticipating a long-awaited reward. She hugged me with unusual warmth. "How did everything go?" "Perfectly. David will be here shortly." David arrived at 7, carrying expensive champagne and wearing a suit, looking like a man who'd just successfully completed the job of the decade, which he believed he had. "Ashley," he said when he saw her, embracing her with the ease of old friends, "your mother tells me you were the one who encouraged her to take this step. That's quite a daughter you have, Claire." Ashley basked in the praise. "I just want Mom to be happy." We sat down to dinner like any ordinary family, mocking good news. David opened the champagne and proposed a toast to new partnerships and to trust, I added, raising my glass to meet his, and to everyone getting exactly what they deserve. Throughout dinner, David entertained us with stories about past ventures, all of them almost certainly invented, while Ashley asked intelligent, interested questions. They were exceptional performers. Without the emails, I might genuinely have believed both of them. Around 8:30, as I was serving dessert, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Excuse me." I stepped into the kitchen. "Marcus, is everything in place?" "Everything's ready. Are you comfortable with the timing?" "Perfect timing." "Give me 2 minutes. I returned to the table. David and Ashley both looked up expectantly. That was my attorney, I said. He had some news about the investment. David's expression shifted immediately. Your attorney? Why would he be involved with our investment? Because I asked him to look into it before I committed $800,000. I hope you don't mind, just standard due diligence. The color drained steadily from David's face. Ashley was glancing between us, momentarily confused. What exactly did he find? David asked carefully. Some rather illuminating information. For instance, did you know that the title company we visited today doesn't actually exist? The business license is fabricated. The office was rented under an assumed name, and the woman who processed our paperwork isn't a licensed agent of any kind. Ashley's face went completely white. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that your friend here just attempted to steal $800,000 from me. David stood abruptly, nearly sending his chair backward. Claire, there's clearly been some kind of error here. Let me make some calls and get to the bottom of this. Sit down, David. Something in my voice stopped him. He lowered himself back into the chair slowly. There's no error. You see, I've known about your arrangement for nearly a week. Ashley found her voice. What arrangement? Mom, I don't understand what's happening. I walked to the kitchen counter and returned with the manila envelope. I placed it on the table and slid out all 43 pages. Perhaps this will provide some clarity. Ashley stared at her own words, looking back at her from the printed pages. The color left her face entirely. Asterisk payment upon completion, $50,000. Asterisk, I read aloud. Asterisk target is receptive to attention. Proceeding with courtship phase. Asterisk, I set the page down. You know, Ashley, I kept wondering how David always seemed to know exactly what I needed to hear, which memories to reference, which insecurities to address, which phrases would land. It's remarkable what a daughter can teach a con artist about her own mother. David was staring at the printed emails as though watching his freedom dissolve. Ashley's voice had dropped to almost nothing. Mom, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you sold me out for $50,000? Can you explain why you helped a stranger design a plan to dismantle my life? It wasn't supposed to hurt you. She whispered. David said the investment was real, that you'd actually profit. David said a great deal of things. Nearly all of them were lies. David tried once more. Claire, let's all slow down and approach this rationally. Let me tell you what actually happened to your $800,000. I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward them. A bank statement. Those cashier's checks were genuine. $800,000 was indeed transferred today. I paused. To the Ohio Attorney General's office, specifically to their Elder Fraud Task Force, the silence in the room was complete. Along with copies of every one of these emails, recordings of each of our conversations, and video documentation of today's fraudulent closing. You recorded our conversations. David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Every date, every phone call, every tender word you delivered while planning to rob me. I turned to Ashley, and I have 6 days of audio from this house, including some very instructive phone calls you made to David when you assumed I was at work. Ashley began to cry, not the controlled, calculated tears she'd deployed for manipulation throughout my life, but something rawer. Desperate, Mom, please, I'm so sorry, I made a terrible mistake. Ashley, you conspired to commit elder fraud against your own mother. That's not a mistake. That's a criminal act. David rose from his chair with sudden purpose. I'm leaving. No, you're not. As if taking their cue, there came a firm knock at the front door. Through the window, the unmistakable silhouettes of uniformed officers. I didn't only provide the evidence to the Attorney General. I also submitted it to local law enforcement. They've been positioned outside for the past hour, waiting for my signal. David lowered himself back into his chair, with the slow resignation of a man who understood the game was over. The signal being our celebration dinner, I continued, I wanted both of you to fully understand what you'd done before facing the consequences. Ashley's sobs were coming harder now. Mom, I'm your daughter. You can't do this. I looked at her across the wreckage of our evening. You stopped being my daughter the moment you decided my life was worth $50,000. I walked to the front door. Behind me, I heard David whisper to Ashley, "You told me she was easy to manipulate." Ashley's answer was barely audible. I thought she was. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob and looked back at them for the last time. The problem with underestimating people, I said, is that eventually they'll surprise you. Then I opened the door and let justice walk in. Detective Sarah Martinez was precisely what I'd hoped for when I'd specifically requested a female investigator, methodical, professional, and entirely immune to tearful performances from attractive suspects, Mrs. Morrison. She said as 2 additional officers read David and Ashley their rights, "We'll need you to accompany us for a formal statement." I gathered my bag and the backup documentation I'd prepared, watching as they were escorted to separate vehicles. Ashley turned back once, her face streaked. "Mom, please, I'm begging you." I held her gaze without wavering. "I'm sorry too, Ashley. Sorry that I raised a daughter who concluded love had a price tag." At the station, I spent 3 hours walking Detective Martinez through the full chronology, from the moment I'd discovered the emails to tonight's dinner. She recorded everything, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Mrs. Morrison, I want to say this is one of the most thorough evidence packages I've encountered. The documentation is extraordinary. I had a good instructor. My husband always said that if something was worth doing, it was worth doing completely. The recordings are particularly significant. Ohio requires only one party consent for audio, so everything you captured is fully admissible. What happens next?" David Harrison is facing multiple felony charges: conspiracy to commit elder fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. Given his apparent history of similar offenses, he's likely looking at 8 to 10 years. And Ashley, the detective's expression softened slightly. Conspiracy charges as well. As a first-time offender, she may be looking at probation and restitution, depending on the prosecutor and judge. I considered that. Detective, I want to be clear about something. I'm not seeking punishment for its own sake, particularly regarding Ashley. If she can genuinely acknowledge what she did and demonstrate a real commitment to making amends, I'm open to discussing alternatives to full prosecution. That's remarkably generous, given what she put you through. She's still my daughter, but I will not be manipulated by guilt or family loyalty again. If she wants forgiveness, she'll have to earn it honestly. It was nearly midnight when Marcus picked me up. We drove through quiet streets before he broke the silence. "How do you feel?" I thought about it, tired, sad, but also, I searched for the word. Powerful. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm actually at the controls of my own life. You handled this brilliantly, Claire. Turning their own scheme against them, it was inspired. I had advantages they never accounted for. They assumed I was isolated, without resources or people who genuinely cared about me. They were wrong on both counts. Marcus pulled into my driveway. I looked at the house with new eyes. 3 hours ago, it had hosted the most intricate betrayal I'd ever experienced. Now, it was simply home again. "What comes next?" he asked. "First, I change all the locks and security codes. Then I figure out what rebuilding looks like without Ashley. That's going to be the hardest part." Inside, I cleared the dinner dishes from what was probably our final meal together as a family. David's unfinished champagne was still on the counter. I poured it down the drain, recycled the bottle, and stood for a long moment in the kitchen that had always been the center of our life together. Then I walked through the house looking at photographs that would need to come down, Ashley's belongings that would need to be collected. The evidence of a relationship that had apparently never been entirely what I thought. The next morning, Detective Martinez called early with an update. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to let you know that David Harrison has requested a meeting with his attorney regarding a plea arrangement. He's very eager to avoid going to trial. What kind of arrangement? Full confession, complete restitution of all funds, and cooperation identifying his previous victims in exchange for a reduced sentence. She paused. We ran his fingerprints last night. David Harrison is an alias. His actual name is Michael Chen, and he's wanted in 3 other states for substantially similar schemes. Your case may help us close several outstanding investigations. I thought about those other women, other families. What about the money? Is recovery possible? That's the interesting part. The account your funds were transferred to, it's been under the control of the Attorney General's office. We've been building a case against this type of fraud for months, and your cooperation allowed us to run a coordinated sting. Your $800,000 is entirely secure. A brief pause. In fact, it's earned approximately $300 in interest while sitting in the state account. I started laughing, probably somewhat hysterically, so I genuinely made money on this investment. In a manner of speaking, yes. I sat in my kitchen long after the call ended, holding my coffee with both hands, thinking about the layered absurdity of it all. David's plan had been to steal my inheritance and disappear. Instead, he'd walked directly into a trap that would send him to prison and help dismantle an organization that had been destroying other families for years. Sometimes justice had a sense of humor. My doorbell rang around noon. A young woman I didn't recognize welled. Rest, carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Jennifer Walsh, Ashley's court appointed attorney. I was hoping we might speak. I invited her in. Ashley asked me to convey how deeply sorry she is for everything that happened. She wants you to know she never intended for things to reach this point. How far did she intend for things to reach? Ms. Walsh shifted in her chair. She maintains that she believed the investment was legitimate, that she was simply connecting you with someone who could help you build wealth. Ms. Walsh, I have recordings of Ashley providing detailed coaching to a known con artist about my specific emotional vulnerabilities, my daily schedule, and the particular phrases most likely to manipulate my decision making. Those aren't the actions of someone who thought she was being helpful. I understand your perspective completely. But Ashley is hoping you might consider allowing her to plead to a misdemeanor with community service rather than felony charges. She's also wondering whether you'd be willing to testify as a character witness. I looked at her for a long moment. Ms. Walsh, your client helped a career criminal construct a plan to destroy her own mother's life for money. What character exactly would I be testifying to? She's very young, and she made a catastrophic error in judgment. She is 25 years old enough to know the difference between right and wrong. After Jennifer left, I sat holding Ashley's unopened letter. Part of me wanted to read it to see whether she had, at last, found her way to something honest, but another part recognized that whatever Ashley had written from a jail cell would be shaped, consciously or not, by the desire to minimize her consequences. I'd already been fooled by that impulse once. I put the letter in my desk drawer. Someday, perhaps, I'd be ready to hear it. Not today. Today, I had a life to rebuild, and for the first time in many years, I intended to build it entirely on my own terms. 3 weeks after Ashley's arrest, my phone rang with a call that reordered everything I thought I understood about this story. Mrs. Morrison, this is Special Agent Robert Thompson with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I need to speak with you about your daughter and Michael Chen. Can we meet today? An hour later, I was seated across from Agent Thompson at Murphy's coffee shop, the same place I'd first spoken to David. The irony registered quietly. Mrs. Morrison, how much did you know about Ashley's financial circumstances before this incident? I knew she was struggling. Working at Denny's, taking community college classes. Why? He opened a folder and slid a bank statement across the table. Ashley wasn't attending classes. She withdrew 8 months ago, and her financial situation wasn't difficult, it was critical. I stared at the numbers: online gambling debts, sports betting, casino accounts in 3 states, $67,000 owed. People who didn't wait politely to be repaid. She never mentioned any of this. She was terrified. Mrs. Morrison, Ashley didn't reach out to Michael Chen because she wanted spending money. She contacted him because she was genuinely afraid for her safety. The coffee shop felt suddenly too small. Chen doesn't only target lonely widows. He runs a sophisticated criminal network that identifies people in desperate financial circumstances and coerces them into targeting their own families. Ashley wasn't his partner. She was also his victim. I thought back through every conversation Ashley and I had shared, the encouragement to trust David, the enthusiasm about the investment. Had any of it been real, or had she been performing under threat the entire time? How does this work? Chen identifies individuals in serious financial trouble, typically through gambling platforms or predatory lending sites. He offers to resolve their debts in exchange for access to a vulnerable family member. If they refuse or attempt to withdraw, he makes the consequences clear. Agent Thompson opened a second folder and showed me photographs. This is Chen's previous associate in Michigan. When she tried to back out of targeting her grandmother, Chen's organization ensured she understood what non-co operation looked like. My hands were unsteady as I set down my cup. Are you saying? Ashley received direct threats. We recovered text messages from her phone, Mrs. Morrison. Chen had surveillance photographs of Ashley entering and leaving your home. He knew your work schedule. He had images of you at the grocery store. He communicated clearly that if she didn't cooperate, both of you would be harmed. The world reconfigured itself around me. Everything I thought I'd understood about Ashley's betrayal suddenly carried new weight. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she ask for help? Because Chen is an expert in psychological control. He convinced Ashley that you'd be safer if you remained unaware, that the plan would succeed without anyone being hurt, and that involving you or law enforcement would cause him to disappear and send someone else to collect through violence. I thought about Ashley's behavior in recent months. Details I'd attributed to guilt about the scheme, the way she startled whenever her phone buzzed, her compulsive checking of door locks, the dark circles I'd assumed were from late study sessions. When I discovered the emails and Ashley realized the plan might be unraveling, she was afraid of what Chen would do to both of us. Exactly, not just afraid of being caught, afraid of being killed. Agent Thompson leaned forward. Mrs. Morrison, your decision to involve law enforcement and arrange the sting operation almost certainly saved both of your lives. Chen was planning to disappear with your money. He was also planning to eliminate the people who could identify him. The coffee I'd been drinking turned cold in my stomach. He was going to have us killed. Chen's organization has been connected to 3 unsolved murders in other states, all family members of individuals who had been coerced into targeting relatives. He views living witnesses as unacceptable liabilities. The silence that followed was very long. Where does this leave Ashley legally? That depends partly on your position. The prosecutor is prepared to consider an arrangement that accounts for the coercion she was operating under, but only with your support. What kind of arrangement? Full testimony against Chen and his organization, in exchange for probation and mandatory counseling for gambling addiction. She'd also be required to make financial restitution for any losses you sustained, though clearly that's not an issue in your case. I thought about Ashley sitting in a cell at this moment, frightened, possibly still unsure whether we were both going to be hurt, carrying the weight of what she'd done while also carrying fear for my safety. All this time, I'd believed she was simply a greedy young woman who had chosen money over her mother. Can I see her? Ashley looked wrecked, pale, hollowed out, carrying the particular exhaustion that comes not from activity, but from weeks of sustained fear and guilt. Mom, her voice through the partition was barely audible. I am so sorry. I am so deeply sorry for everything. Ashley, I know about the gambling debts. I know about Chen's threats. Her face dissolved. I wanted to tell you, but he had photographs of you, Mom. He knew your schedule. He told me if I said anything, if I involved anyone, he'd find another route to your money. And it wouldn't be as careful. Why didn't you just come to me about the debts? $67,000, we could have found a way. $67,000, Mom, more than we've ever had at one time. It would have consumed so much of what you'd finally been given, and you would have known how badly I'd been lying to you, and I thought, she started again. I thought if I could just help Chen get some of it, pay everything off, it would all just disappear, and we'd go back to normal, and you'd never have to carry any of it. I looked at my daughter through the reinforced glass, not the calculating criminal I'd constructed in my imagination over the past weeks, but a frightened young woman who had made catastrophic choices while trying, in her distorted way, to protect us. What you did was still wrong, Ashley. Whatever the circumstances, you put me in danger. I know that, I know. And I will spend whatever time I have making up for it. The FBI believes Chen was planning to have us both killed after the money transferred. Ashley went white. He told me no one would get hurt. He promised criminals lie. That's what makes them criminals. We sat in quiet for a while, both thinking about how differently this story could have ended. What happens now? Now you testify against Chen and help the FBI stop him from doing this to other families. And you get professional help for your gambling addiction. A pause, and then we see, is there still an asterisk? After all of this, I looked at my daughter, this person I had loved completely for 25 years, who had put us both inside a criminal scheme because she couldn't find a way to ask for help. I don't know yet, Ashley, but we're both alive. And that's more than we would have been. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. It was small and fragile, but it was there. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse watching Michael Chen receive his sentence, 25 years in federal prison. Ashley sat beside me, thinner than she'd been, but carrying herself differently, more honestly. The defendant systematically identified vulnerable individuals and their families, Judge Williams said, looking directly at Chen. This organization devastated lives, drained life savings, and in several cases committed murder to conceal its activities. This sentence reflects the full gravity of those crimes. Chen showed nothing as he was led away. I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete closure. Afterward, Ashley and I walked out into autumn sunlight together. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think you'll ever actually forgive me, not just in a legal sense? Personally, I'd been sitting with that question for months. Ashley, I forgave you the day I learned about the threats against our lives. What you did was wrong, but you were trapped by a professional predator in an impossible situation. I still betrayed your trust. Yes, you did, and it will take time to rebuild that. But we have time now, which we wouldn't have had if Chen's plan had worked. She nodded, tears beginning to form. I've been going to Gamblers Anonymous 3 times a week, and I'm enrolled in community college again this fall. Actually enrolled. That's good. How are you managing financially? I got a job downtown, day to entry at an insurance company. Nothing dramatic, but it's honest work and the pay is steady. We drove home in a quiet that had taken months to arrive at, no longer strained, but something that was beginning, cautiously, to resemble peace. Mom, can I tell you something else, always? When I was planning to help Chen, I kept telling myself it was just money, that you'd still have plenty, and I'd pay it back somehow, and eventually it would all smooth out. She looked out the window, but sitting in that cell, I realized something. What? It was never about the money. It was about treating you like a resource instead of my mother. That's the thing I'm actually sorry for. I pulled into our driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. Ashley, your father died when you were 17. Every significant decision I've made from that day forward was about protecting you and providing for you. I wonder sometimes if I shielded you so completely that you never learned what it looks like to face a real problem on your own. You think this is somehow your fault. I think we both made mistakes. You made terrible choices when you were desperate, but I allowed those choices to be possible by never teaching you that you could survive consequences. A pause. It's time for both of us to figure out who you are when you're not depending on me to fix things. That evening, we cooked together for the first time since her arrest. Not an elaborate celebration, just simple comfort food shared between two women who had survived something terrible and were finding their way back to each other. I saw Marcus at the courthouse. Ashley said, as we cleaned up, "He mentioned you've been thinking about traveling." "I have. I've never been anywhere beyond Ohio and the neighboring states. I thought perhaps I'd take the inheritance and actually see something of the world." "Where would you go?" "Ireland first. Your father always wanted to see Ireland. Then Italy, Scotland, England. All the places we talked about but never managed to afford." Ashley smiled, a real one, full and unguarded. "That sounds extraordinary." "I think so. I might be gone 6 months, long enough to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by someone else's needs. And when you come back..." "When I come back, we'll see where we both are. Maybe we'll be ready for something different between us." 3 months later, I boarded a flight to Dublin carrying 2 suitcases and a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in decades. Ashley drove me to the airport, no longer the frightened young woman who had made desperate choices trying to protect us both, but someone genuinely learning to meet her problems directly. "Take care of yourself," I told her as we embraced. "Take care of yourself too, Mom. You deserve every bit of this." As the plane lifted off the runway and Ohio shrank away beneath the clouds, I thought about everything that had delivered me to this particular window, this particular moment. Ashley's betrayal had come within inches of destroying me, but it had also stripped away everything false and forced me to discover strengths I hadn't known I possessed. I'd learned to trust my instincts rather than politely ignoring red flags. I'd learned that family relationships require mutual respect, not merely unconditional surrender. And I'd learned that at 50, too, with everything still ahead, my life was not remotely over. 6 hours later, I was standing in Dublin Airport, surrounded by accents I'd only ever heard in films, holding a city map I'd never had reason to open, completely alone in the world for the first time in 30 years. It was terrifying. It was electric. It was exactly right. A text arrived from Ashley. "Safe travels, Mom. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to start over." I smiled, tucked the phone away, and stepped out into the unfamiliar city. She was right about starting over, but she'd gotten one detail wrong. I wasn't starting over. I was finally, properly beginning. And that was worth infinitely more than any inheritance could ever be. Remove star sign and commas in the end. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't evening the score. It's becoming everything your enemies never believed you could be. Sometimes the deepest betrayal leads to the most complete liberation. And sometimes the people who set out to destroy you end up handing you exactly what you needed.